What's good, everyone? In today's video, I'll be giving you 6 tips to master your aim in Apex Legends Season 10. Now, if you practice these tips that I'm about to give you, your aim will certainly improve over time. The 3 most important features that make up a really good player in Apex are aim, movement, and IQ. So if you're interested in some more in-depth movement guides specifically for my controller players, I will link 2 previous movement guides in the description of this video. Now, these tips to improve your aim that I'm about to give you can help any player, regardless of what input you play on. So if you're on mouse and keyboard or controller, and regardless of your skill level. And it's important to note that my opinion is aim is always the most important factor when it comes to getting kills and winning games. So if you look back to whoever your favorite content creator is, I promise you it all centers around their aim. If they're not hitting their shots and getting knocks or eliminations, then they aren't winning games. And therefore, it's crucial you implement these tips to become a better player in Apex Legends. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Tip number 1, you've got to learn the recoil patterns of each gun. Now, if you didn't know, each gun in Apex has a predictable recoil pattern, and the only way to improve the handling of the recoil, besides obviously your skill, is the more attachments you add onto it, the less the recoil will be. If you're new to the game, realize which guns have an easier recoil and try to master those first. Guns like the R301, Volt, and Flatline are some of my favorites and certainly are in the top tier of weapons. And you can look up recoil patterns on Google, or you can go into the firing range and spray the gun at one of these rocks and try not to control the recoil. It will give you a very accurate representation of what the recoil pattern is. As you can see in this clip, the recoil pattern of the R301 is sort of like a 7 or a question mark, and the recoil pattern of the Flatline is kind of a zigzag line. It's going to go to the left and the right and then more to the left. Now, don't overwhelm yourself with learning every weapon, especially if you're casual or new to the game and you don't have time to play often. But on the flip side, if you have a bunch of time and you're playing the game consistently, definitely try to learn every weapon, because if you play a lot of BR Apex where you can't really control the guns you find off drop or in early game, then it's really important that you get comfortable with the majority of the weapon pool. Tip number 2, find the right sensitivity for you. Now, frankly, I think this topic is super overrated because people like to think changing their sense all the time will help them get better and better. But my take is the more you switch around your sense, the more muscle memory has to try to relearn and make those micro adjustments over and over again. So once you find what works for you, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it. My recommendation is generally the lower the sense, the better, especially when you're starting out. If you start to feel like you outgrow it and you're not able to track your opponents as well as you used to, then that's when you can increase it and try to change things up a bit. But just understand that in Apex, the component of movement is such a huge variable in any fight. So if your opponent has a nice strafe and is doing it efficiently and they're going left to right and you're playing on a super high sense, making those micro adjustments to track them will be more difficult for the majority of you watching this. Now, I do have a settings video where I cover my sensitivity in it, and if you're interested in it, I will link it in the info cards now. And as I say in that video, sensitivity is all preference. So what I'm showing you in that video is what works for me, and that goes for every other person who's showing you their sensitivity. All right, guys, before I get into tip number 3 and the rest of the video, please do me one favor and smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. This will only take a second of your time. It helps the video out tremendously, and I would truly appreciate it. All right, moving on to the rest of the tips. Tip number 3, dedicate yourself to a solid warm-up routine before you get on Apex. What I like to do is go into the firing range, pick up the guns that I think I'm going to use that day, generally the Flatline, R301, R99, and I just start trying to one-clip the dummies. And once I'm successful in doing that, I incorporate some movement with it, so strafing left to right, and then I slowly level up the gun. So I'll throw an attachment on, then I'll throw a couple of attachments, maybe a sight, and then I just consistently get the recoil pattern down, get used to what the gun feels like, because I'll be honest, if you take a few day break, if you take a week break, you can kind of lose that muscle memory. It can take you a few games or maybe even some more games to warm up and actually feel the gun and know how to control it. So if you hop into the firing range for 10 to 15 minutes, I guarantee you will start to pick up on the patterns of the recoil, and it will just become a much more consistent aspect to your gameplay. So I highly recommend warming up for 5 to 10, 15 minutes, whatever you decide, before you hop into some games. Tip number 4, stay calm and don't panic. I coach people every week in this game, and I see it so often. People start to miss a lot of their shots, they start to panic or get down about it, and then that just spirals them down even more. Listen, it's totally normal to miss your shots, and everyone does it. The 3 things to do when you're missing shots is reposition, reload, and readjust. Do not let these things bring you down and just try to remain confident. There is a huge mental aspect when it comes to gaming, and it's important that you are able to maintain the right mindset to set yourself up for success going forward. Tip number 5, learn when to hip fire versus aiming down your sight. Now, it's crucial to be good at hip firing because in Apex, a lot of the fights you'll get into are close range. And hip firing in this game is really accurate for a lot of the weapons. Now, each weapon class has a different strafe speed, so you'll be able to move faster if you hip fire than if you ADS. And for my slower sense people, making these micro adjustments in any close range fight will be so much easier if you hip fire instead of aiming down your sight. The majority of weapons have a similar, if not identical, recoil pattern for when you hip fire versus ADS. LMGs, for example, will have a different recoil pattern for hip fire, but will also slow down your strafe speed if you ADS with them. SMGs and ARs are going to be more accurate up close and have a faster strafe speed than the LMGs. Now, it's very important to practice your hip fire so that your aim will be more balanced overall. You need to adapt to hip fire or aiming down your sight quickly in any given fight. Now, if you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing as I post a ton of solid Apex Legends content. My channel centers around helping you guys improve at Apex. All right, let's move on to tip number 6. Tip number 6, draw putt in pubs and get into these fights. You never want to get into the habit of just looting for the majority of your games. The only way to improve is to put yourself into the situations that are going to happen to you over and over again. And the best way to do this is to just keep sending fights. In pubs specifically, if you're trying to improve, don't worry about winning the game. Just try to take like 99% of the fights that you can. Obviously, play it smart and don't make low IQ plays, but at the end of the day, you just got to get involved and sink or swim. You need to practice, and there's no quick fix. You can't replicate what goes on in the game in an aim labs, Kovacs, or even the firing range. There's just way too many variables in Apex to emulate each and everything. And I know this tip may sound generic or simple, but it's the reality. Just focus on taking fights and improving. If you follow the rest of these tips, the pieces to the puzzle will start to click and you'll be on your way to mastering your aim in no time. I promise you. Now, before you go, I've got one more bonus tip, so don't go anywhere yet. All right, guys, here's the bonus tip. Make sure to use distance as a means to improve your recoil handling. While warming up, I like to get about 70 meters out and try to put my whole clip into those moving targets. This will help you control the recoil when it's at its hardest to control. As you get closer to your target, the recoil will start to feel much more manageable. This tip is something you can implement and spend 3 to 5 minutes doing before you hop into some games, and I'm telling you from experience, it will definitely improve your handling. If you have minimal or no attachments on your gun when you do this, the recoil will be even harder to control. So slowly upgrade your weapon when you do this drill to see the difference of what the attachments make. I hope you found these tips helpful, and I personally know from extensive experience of playing and coaching that they truly will help your aim improve. Don't forget to turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on my next upload. That's going to be it for me. YouTube thinks you'll enjoy this previous video of mine. Let me know if they're right. Peace.